My dear friend, let me share with you a story that happened right here on the Oregon coast, not 2 years past. It's about folks who discovered that sometimes the good Lord works through the most unexpected people. You know how we always say that everyone has a story? Well, this one started at a wedding, though not the joyful celebration you'd expect. It reminds me that in our autumn years, we understand things young folks can't, that pride costs more than money ever could, that forgiveness heals deeper than medicine, and that the strangest blessings often come wrapped in sorrow. Pour yourself some coffee, the percolated kind that fills the whole kitchen with its aroma, and settle in. This tale needs telling, and you need to hear it, because it might just remind you of someone you know, or maybe someone you used to be. Father Frank's prayer book slipped from his weathered hands and fell to the marble floor with an echo that made everyone in St. Mary's Catholic Church go silent. The pages, thin as onion skin from 40 years of daily reading, scattered across the center aisle like leaves after the first hard frost. The old priest, 72 years old and steady through countless weddings and funerals, stood frozen at the altar. His hands trembled the way they hadn't since his first sermon back in 1978. He was staring at a woman in the 12th pew. "Dear Lord in heaven," he said, forgetting the microphone was on, his voice carrying to every corner of the small church. "That woman, she's the one who sat with my brother Thomas when he passed." Every head in those worn wooden pews turned to look. Victoria Whitmore, standing at the altar in her grandmother's wedding dress, altered, of course, but still carrying that ivory elegance from 1952, went pale as fresh milk. Her bouquet of white roses, the same kind her mother had carried, began to shake in her manicured hands. The woman Father Frank stared at sat beside Ethan Chase. She wore a simple navy dress, the kind you might find at Penny's, still showing the fold marks from the store shelf. Nothing fancy about her. Gray hair pulled back with a drugstore clip, no jewelry except a small silver cross at her throat. But she held herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd learned that possessions don't make a person. Ethan felt her fingers tighten on his coat sleeve. Just a small pressure, like when his grandmother used to steady herself getting up from her chair. This woman he'd met just yesterday. This woman he'd found feeding a 3-legged dog behind Pike Place Market in Seattle, somehow knew these people. And more puzzling still, they knew her. "Father?" Blake Sterling, the groom, stepped forward from his place by the altar. He had that smooth way about him that lawyers cultivate, like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. "Father, are you feeling all right?" But Father Frank wasn't paying Blake any mind. He was walking down that center aisle, moving faster than his arthritic knees had allowed in years, heading straight for the woman in the navy dress. "Grace," he called out, his voice cracking like a teenage boy's. "Grace, is that really you?" The woman stood slowly, careful-like, the way you do when every eye in the room is upon you. She didn't correct the name he'd called her. Ethan watched her face, saw something pass over it like cloud shadow over wheat fields. Recognition, certainly, but something else, too. The look of someone whose past has finally caught up. "Hello, Father," she said, her voice educated and gentle, carrying that quality of someone who'd taught school or maybe read stories to children. The priest reached her and without hesitation pulled her into an embrace that spoke of grief and gratitude mixed together like sugar and salt. "Thomas talked about you until the very end. The woman who read him poetry when the pain was too much to bear. Who held his hand when I couldn't be there because of parish duties." From the altar came Victoria's voice, sharp as winter wind. "What is she doing here?" The words weren't aimed at Father Frank. They were directed at Ethan, and they carried more than anger. Something else was there. A fear, maybe. Or recognition dawning like a sunrise you don't want to see. Blake touched his bride's elbow, gentle but insistent. "Darling, we should continue with the ceremony." "No." Victoria stepped down from the altar, her heels clicking on the marble with each deliberate step, the sound echoing like a countdown. The congregation held its breath, You could have heard a hymnal page turn. "I know you." She stopped 3 feet from the woman in navy, close enough that everyone could see the tears she was fighting to hold back, the way her grandmother's dress trembled with her breathing. "You're the woman who was with my father. The woman who—" Her voice broke like fine china. "You were there when Daddy died." Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Thursday morning, 36 hours before the wedding, Ethan Chase stood at his kitchen counter, arranging pills into the weekly divider his daughter had bought him. The little white ones for blood pressure. Dr. Morrison had insisted on those after his last physical. The yellow capsules for cholesterol that cost more than his first car payment back in '72. The half tablet for sleep that never quite worked, leaving him staring at the ceiling fan until 3 in the morning. Rain streaked down the windows of his apartment, turning downtown Seattle into a watercolor painting gone wrong. 40 floors up in this glass tower, he might as well have been living in the clouds. Nothing like the craftsman house he'd built with Victoria, back when they'd planned their life together. 2 kids, maybe 3, a garden with tomatoes and snap peas. The wedding invitation leaned against his Mr. Coffee machine, the gold lettering catching the overhead light. Victoria Whitmore and Blake Sterling request the honor of your presence. The paper felt expensive between his fingers, thick as cardboard. Nothing like the simple announcements they'd picked out together at the print shop on Roosevelt Avenue. His coffee tasted bitter. Black, no sugar. He'd given up sweetness when Victoria left, though he'd never admit the connection out loud. Pike Place Market hummed with its usual Saturday morning crowd. Ethan bought salmon from the same fishmonger his father had used, pretending. Ethan nodded when it seemed appropriate, paid with a 20, waved off the change. Behind the loading dock, away from the tourists and their cameras, he saw her. A woman knelt in a puddle from last night's rain, her knees dark with wet. She was breaking apart what looked like a day-old sandwich from Specialty's Bakery, the kind that cost $8 and came wrapped in wax paper. Not eating it herself, but feeding it piece by careful piece to a dog missing his right front leg. "Easy now, Storm," she murmured, her voice carrying that teacher quality of patient repetition. "Small bites. Those teeth of yours can't handle much more, can they?" The dog, some kind of terrier mix under all that matted fur, accepted each piece with surprising gentleness, his remaining front paw trembling with the effort of staying upright. The woman looked up, caught Ethan watching. Her eyes were gray as Puget Sound in November, steady and unashamed. No defiance there, just acknowledgement, the way you'd nod to a neighbor over the fence. "That's your breakfast," Ethan heard himself say. "His or mine?" She examined the dog's mouth, her fingers gentle around swollen gums. "Right now he needs it more. Infection in there. Probably hurts just to breathe." The door handle of St. Mary's Catholic Church felt cold as January metal under Nora's palm. She traced the worn grooves where thousands of hands had gripped before her. Baptisms, funerals, weddings, stretching back to 1923 when the church was built. Down near the bottom, scratched into the brass like a secret, someone had carved initials. T.W. plus M.M. 1987. Her finger caught on the rough edges. "You ready for this?" Ethan asked behind her. His breath carried the peppermint from the lifesaver he'd been working on during the drive down Highway 101, past Haystack Rock, where families were already setting up their Saturday picnics despite the October chill. She pushed open the heavy door. The church air wrapped around them thick as wool, old wood polish, candle wax, and white lilies so strong you could taste them on your tongue. The kind of flowers they used for Easter service and funerals both. Nora chose a pew 12 rows back, far enough to watch but close enough to the side door if needed. The red velvet cushion wheezed slightly as they sat, releasing the smell of Murphy's oil soap and age. Ethan kept touching his tie, a nervous habit she'd noticed during their 3-hour drive from Seattle. His jaw muscle worked in steady rhythm, like he was chewing words he couldn't say. "Nora? Nora, is that really you?" Margaret Ross abandoned her post at the guestbook table so fast she knocked over the pearl-handled pen that had been Victoria's grandmother's. Her nurse's shoes, those white Danskos that every hospital worker wore, squeaked against the marble floor as she hurried over. "Oh, honey, it is you." Margaret grabbed both of Nora's hands, studying them like she was checking for a pulse. "Harold asked for you every single night those last 2 weeks."
Kept saying, "Tell the poem lady I remember every word of that Robert Frost. Tell her I took the road less traveled after all." Nora squeezed Margaret's hands once, firm but brief, the way you'd comfort someone without making a fuss about it. "He went peaceful," Margaret continued, lowering her voice the way nurses do when delivering news. "That last morning, you'd read him stopping by woods on a snowy evening. He recited it back, word perfect, right before the good Lord took him home." Ethan shifted beside her. She could feel his confusion like heat from a stove. "I worked nights at Mercy General for 30 years, Margaret explained to him. "Nora here, she'd come sit with folks who were passing. No pay, never asked for thanks. Just showed up when families couldn't, when the dying were alone." An elderly man 2 rows ahead turned around. Warren Hutchins. She remembered him, the Chevrolet mechanic from Burnside whose wife Dolores went slowly from pancreatic cancer. "You sang to my Dolly," Warren said, his hearing aid whistling slightly the way they did when the battery was going. "That song about the birds. His eye is on the sparrow. She couldn't talk at the end, but I heard her humming along." More faces turned. Anna Chen from the Rexall Pharmacy, whose father spent 6 months withering away in hospice. Young Jamie Morrison, whose grandmother feared the darkness more than death itself. Each face carried recognition, small nods heavy with remembered grief and gratitude. The organ started up, Mrs. Pemberton at the keys, playing Wagner's Wedding March the way she had for 40 years of Saturdays. The back doors opened, and Victoria appeared in the doorway, October morning light making her veil glow like spun sugar. Her dress rustled with each measured step. Her grandmother's dress from 1952, altered at the waist but still carrying that timeless elegance. Duchess satin, they called that fabric, heavy enough to stand on its own. Her eyes swept over the congregation with the practiced poise of someone who'd been in the society pages since her debutante ball. Then her gaze found Ethan, a little flutter in her smile, like a candle flame in a draft. Her eyes shifted to the woman beside him. The smile died completely. The bouquet in Victoria's hands, white roses mixed with baby's breath, the same arrangement her mother had carried, began to shake. One rose petal fell to the burgundy carpet, then another, then 3 more, leaving a trail like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale. Victoria's face went pale under her makeup. She stopped walking right there in the center aisle, her father's absence suddenly obvious. No one to steady her, to whisper, "Just breathe, sweetheart," the way George Whitmore might have done. Blake whispered something urgent from the altar, probably wondering why his bride had turned into a pillar of salt. The organ music continued, Mrs. Pemberton playing on automatic after 4 decades of practice, but Victoria stood frozen, staring at the woman in the simple navy dress. Father Frank raised his leather-bound prayer book to begin the ceremony, the one with his name embossed in gold from his ordination in 1975. His eyes found Nora over his wire-rimmed reading glasses, the kind they sold at Woolworth's for $4.99. Recognition dawned on his face like sunrise over the Pacific. The prayer book slipped from his fingers. It hit the marble floor with a crack that echoed off the vaulted ceiling and made baby Jesus in the stained glass window seem to jump. Pages scattered across the altar like white birds startled from their roost. "Dear Lord in heaven," Father Frank whispered, but the microphone caught every word, sent them flowing through speakers hidden behind plaster saints. "That woman, she held my brother Thomas when he died."
Victoria's bouquet hit the floor with a soft thud. The white ribbon unraveled, roses rolling toward the altar like scattered pearls from a broken necklace. She was already moving, her heels striking the marble in sharp, determined clicks, heading straight for row 12. Behind her, someone's Polaroid camera flashed and whirred. Blake started down from the altar, his morning coat flapping.
Margaret Ross pressed her hands to her mouth, the way people do when they're trying not to cry in church. Victoria stopped 3 feet from their pew, close enough that Nora could smell her perfume. White shoulders, the same scent her mother had worn before she ran off to Cabo with the tennis instructor. Close enough to see the small scar above her left eyebrow, the one she'd gotten at age 4, falling from her daddy's shoulders while reaching for stars he'd sworn he'd hung just for her. The reception tent stretched across the Seafoam Inn's lawn like a white circus top, canvas snapping in the October wind that came off the Pacific. Inside, round tables dressed in ivory linens held centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath, each one with a little card showing table numbers in Victoria's own handwriting. She'd insisted on doing them herself, the way her mother had for her own wedding back in '74. Nora stood beside the chocolate fountain, one of those new contraptions that kept the chocolate flowing like a little brown waterfall. The thing probably cost more to rent than most folks spent on groceries in a month. She watched the dark liquid cascade over its tiers, while wedding guests pretended not to stare at her. Conversation stopped mid-word when she walked past. Champagne glasses paused at lips. Women leaned into their husbands, whispering behind hands that sparkled with anniversary diamonds. Ethan came back from the bar holding 2 glasses, whiskey neat for himself, the kind that burned going down, and plain soda water with lime for her. The ice clinked against crystal as his hand trembled slightly. "We could leave right now," he said, voice low. "Just walk out to the parking lot and drive back to Seattle." Before Nora could answer, Victoria appeared like a storm front moving in from the ocean. She'd changed into her reception dress, shorter than the ceremony gown, what they called tea length, in that shade of ivory that cost extra at the dress shop. But her feet were bare, leaving wet prints on the portable dance floor they'd laid over the grass. Her mascara, the expensive waterproof kind from the department store counter, had given up its promise, leaving dark streams down her cheeks like rain on window glass. "You." Victoria's finger pointed straight at Nora, and the champagne in her other hand sloshed over the rim. Dom Perignon from 1996 running down her wrist. George's favorite year. The year Victoria had graduated from college, before everything went wrong. "I know who you are now. Every night for 3 months. 3 months you sat in that chair beside his bed." Blake materialized from behind the ice sculpture, 2 swans with their necks intertwined, already beginning to weep in the afternoon sun. His morning coat was still perfect, not a hair out of place, despite the chaos at the church. That lawyer's ability to stay pressed and proper no matter what storm was brewing. "Victoria, darling, the photographer needs us for—" "Be quiet." The words came out flat and hard as day-old bread. Blake's mouth opened, then closed. In 4 years together, Victoria had never spoken to him that way. "This woman watched my father die." Ethan stepped forward, protective instinct older than thought. "Victoria, what are you talking about?" "Ask her," Victoria laughed, but it wasn't a laugh. More like glass breaking in your hand when you grip too tight. "Ask your hired date about George Whitmore. Ask her what he said about his disappointment of a daughter who chose money over love." Nora set her soda water down on the white tablecloth. A ring of condensation immediately darkened the fabric, spreading outward like spilled secrets. "Your father loved you," Nora said, keeping her voice level as a carpenter's rule. "Liar." Victoria's voice cracked on the word, like stepping on thin ice. $20 million to charity. His entire fortune. Everything except the house, which he left to Manuel the gardener. The man who trimmed his hedges got more than his only daughter. "He left you a letter. 1 page.
Victoria pulled a folded paper from inside her bodice, the edges soft from handling, like she'd read it 100 times trying to find different words. One page after 36 years, after I brought him grandchildren he barely looked at, after I spent every Christmas in that house pretending we were a real family. Blake touched her elbow, gentle as a nurse checking for fever. This isn't the time or place. Victoria jerked away, hard enough that champagne splashed onto Blake's Italian leather shoes, the ones that cost more than most people's mortgage payments.
Did he tell you why?
Victoria's eyes stayed locked on Nora. Did he explain what kind of daughter gets written out of her father's will? Nora looked at Ethan. She could see the wheels turning in his mind, pieces clicking together like tumblers in a lock. George made mistakes, Nora said carefully. He knew that at the end. Mistakes? Victoria laughed again, louder this time. The guests at nearby tables gave up pretending not to watch, turning openly in their rented chairs. Like destroying the only man who ever loved me without wanting something in return? She turned to Ethan. You never knew, did you? The lawsuit that nearly bankrupted you. The permits that got mysteriously pulled. The suppliers who suddenly wouldn't return your calls. Ethan's whiskey glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The municipal investigation that cost me $40,000 in legal fees?
All Daddy. Every single attack on your business, orchestrated from his study with the leather chairs and the portrait of my mother who left us both. Victoria's tears ran fresh tracks through her ruined makeup. And I'm the one who asked him to do it. The tent went quiet, except for the wind rattling the canvas walls and the eternal splash of the chocolate fountain. Somewhere near the dessert table, a child started crying. That tired, confused wail of a little one kept up past nap time. The chocolate kept flowing over its tears, oblivious to the hearts breaking around it. But he dropped everything, Ethan said slowly, like he was working out a math problem in his head. Walked away from a $12 million claim. My lawyer said it was like watching someone burn money. Because of her. Victoria pointed at Nora again, her hands steady now despite the tears. She convinced him. Some story about forgiveness and dying with peace in your heart. Didn't you? Blake stepped closer, trying to contain the damage like a good lawyer should. We should discuss this privately. There is no privately. Victoria gestured at the tent full of wedding guests, all pretending to eat their salmon and wild rice while hanging on every word. Everyone already knows George Whitmore cut his only child out of his will. Might as well know why. Nora picked up her water glass, took a small sip. The ice had melted, leaving it tasteless as disappointment. I asked him one question, she said finally. Just one. What question? Ethan's voice came out rough as sandpaper. I asked him what mattered more, being right or being remembered with love. Victoria's champagne glass shattered on the portable dance floor. The sound cracked across the tent like a rifle shot. Blood appeared on her palm where the crystal had cut deep, mixing with champagne on the white painted wood, making pink puddles that spread like watercolors. Blake pulled out his pocket square, white linen with his monogram embroidered in navy thread. Victoria stared at the blood like it belonged to someone else, like she'd never seen her own insides before. He chose wrong, she whispered. Then louder so everyone could hear, he chose wrong. She looked directly at Nora, and something shifted in her face, recognition dawning like a terrible sunrise. There's something else, something you're not telling them. Victoria's voice dropped low, dangerous. I know who you really are. The hotel room at the Seafoam Inn overlooked Haystack Rock, that giant piece of volcanic stone that had been standing in the Pacific since before anyone could remember. The October tide was coming in, filling the pools where children hunted for hermit crabs during summer vacations. Ethan stood at the window, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck like he'd given up on formality. Behind him, Nora sat in one of those vinyl chairs every hotel seemed to buy from the same catalog,
still wearing the navy dress with its telltale creases from the department store shelf. "Tell me about George Whitmore," Ethan said, his voice flat as week-old soda. Nora's fingers found the worn spot on the armrest where countless travelers had gripped during countless difficult conversations. The cleaning staff never could get that spot clean, no matter how much pledge they used. 18 months ago, she began, her voice carrying the weight of remembering. January. The kind of cold that makes your bones ache. George Whitmore's bedroom smelled like a pharmacy mixed with fear. That particular smell of illness, medicine and sweat and something else, something like fruit going bad in a bowl. The morphine pump beside his bed clicked every 8 seconds, steady as a metronome, delivering relief that never quite reached the pain. His sheets, Egyptian cotton with his initials monogrammed in gold thread, the kind that cost more than most folks' car payments, were soaked through with perspiration. Despite the January cold seeping through the window he insisted stay cracked open. Said he needed real air, not the recycled stuff from the heating system. Nora adjusted the oxygen tube that ran under his nose. The flow meter on the tank read 4 liters per minute. His lips had gone from healthy pink to gray to a bluish tinge that meant his body was losing the fight, cell by cell. "You're not getting paid for this." His words came between coughs that brought up sputum tinged with blood. Even dying, he noticed everything. The accumulation of wealth had trained him to watch for people's angles. "Margaret tells me you refuse the family money. Won't even take gas reimbursement." "I don't need money, Mr. Whitmore. Everyone needs money. That's what makes the world go round." She pulled the visitor's chair closer. Leather, probably Italian, the kind that belonged in a law office, not a sick room. The same chair where Victoria used to sit for bedtime stories, back before her mother ran off, back when George still believed in happy endings. "I need to be useful," Nora said. "That's different from needing money." George studied her face with eyes that had once spotted contract loopholes at 50 paces, but now struggled to focus on anything past arm's length. "You're the woman from the newspaper story, 5 years back. The accident on Interstate 5. Nora's hands went still on the blanket she'd been smoothing, a nervous habit from 30 years of making beds in houses that weren't hers anymore. "Black ice, semi-truck jackknifed." His voice was matter-of-fact, the way you'd read a grocery list. "Husband and daughter killed instantly. You were teaching at the University of Washington, literature department. Now you're living behind Pike Place, feeding stray dogs with food from your own mouth." Ethan turned from the window. Outside, a family was building a sandcastle, the children shrieking as waves threatened their creation. "He had you investigated?" "He investigated everyone who came within 10 feet of his deathbed," Nora said. 40 years of hostile takeovers and corporate raids, that kind of life makes you suspicious of kindness. He knew about Storm, my 3-legged dog, knew I'd been teaching freshman composition, knew about the accident down to the police report details. But not who you really were. No, not then. Nora shifted in the chair, its vinyl squeaking like wet shoes. That came later. Through the hotel's thin walls came the sound of the wedding party returning from the beach. Doors slamming, voices raised in the kind of forced celebration that happens when everyone's pretending nothing's wrong. Someone's child was having a meltdown about sand in their good shoes. Victoria was 7 when her mother left, Nora continued, her voice steady as a heartbeat. Old enough to remember, but too young to understand. George's breathing rattled like dice in a cup, what the hospice nurses called the death rattle, though they never used that term around families. 3 in the morning, that hour when the walls between this world and the next seemed thinnest. The morphine made him talk, made the secrets spill out like water from a broken dam. Miranda took the tennis instructor to Cabo. The words slurred together, but Nora had learned to understand him through the drug haze. Left a note on Victoria's pillow. Thought she was being kind, explaining things to her daughter. Woman couldn't even leave right. Nora measured out liquid morphine with the oral syringe, 2 milliliters under the tongue every 4 hours, though they both knew the schedule was more suggestion than rule now. The note said love wasn't enough. George laughed, which turned into choking, which turned into him spitting blood into the kidney-shaped basin Nora held. Said she needed passion, adventure, fire, all the things a mortgage and a minivan couldn't give her. Children internalize abandonment, Nora said, wiping his mouth with a warm washcloth she'd prepared. Always warm, never cold, because dying people feel cold enough already. I taught her worse. The spit collected at the corners of his mouth faster than she could wipe it away. Taught her that love equals leaving, that only money stays faithful, that bank accounts don't run off with tennis instructors. The oxygen concentrator hummed its mechanical lullaby. Outside, January rain hit the windows like fingers tapping, asking to come in. She was seeing someone 8 years ago, George said. Nice boy. Poor but decent. Worked with his hands, built things that lasted. Ethan Chase. George's eyes snapped to hers, suddenly clear despite the morphine. You know him? I know you're destroying him. The lawsuit, the permit denials, the investigation that's costing him everything. How could you possibly? Mr. Whitmore, dying people talk. Your lawyer, Henderson, he's in room 303 with liver cancer. Talks about your cases when the pain gets bad. Says you're going after some builder who dated your daughter. Says Victoria asked you to ruin him. That's when he told me, Nora said to Ethan, who'd sat down on the bed's edge, the mattress creaking under his weight. About Victoria convincing him to destroy you. She wanted to prove she'd made the right choice, picking Blake's money over your love. She called love a weakness. Ethan's voice came out flat as roadkill. She called it that because that's what George taught her after Miranda left. Someone knocked on the door, 3 short raps, then 2 long ones, like a code. Ethan ignored it. But George dropped the lawsuit, he said. Walked away from $12 million in damages. Nora stood, walked to the window where Ethan had been standing. The surfers were coming in now, black dots against the gray water, giving up as the light died. I'm dying badly, George had said that night. The catheter bag hanging half full of urine the color of strong tea. Kidneys failing on top of everything else. Alone, angry, afraid. Nora checked his feet for edema. The swelling had reached his knees, fluid his failing heart couldn't pump away. Victoria comes Tuesdays and Thursdays, 20 minutes exactly. Sits by the door like she might need to run. He tried to gesture, but his hand barely lifted off the blanket. Won't touch me. Says I smell like death. You do smell like death. He laughed, which caused pain, which caused moaning that went on for 30 seconds while she held his hand and counted breaths with him. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, until the wave passed. You don't lie to make people feel better, he said when he could speak again. Dying people don't need lies. They need witnesses. The word hung between them like fog. Outside, November wind stripped the last leaves from the maple tree George had planted the day Victoria was born. 36 years of growth, and now it stood naked against the sky. I could still win the lawsuit, George said. $12 million in damages, plus interest, plus punitive damages for the emotional distress of my daughter. You could. Destroy him completely. Take his business, his reputation, his future. Teach Victoria that she was right, that power and money matter more than whatever foolish thing she felt for him. Is that what you want to teach her? George closed his eyes. The heart monitor beside his bed showed irregular rhythms, his ticker giving out along with everything else. I don't even remember anymore what I'm trying to prove, he whispered. Nora leaned forward, close enough to smell the decay on his breath. Mr. Whitmore, I need to ask you something. When you're gone, because we both know that's coming soon, what do you want to be remembered for? Being right about money mattering most? or being the father who, at the very end, reached for his daughter's hand? Tears ran sideways down George's face, pooling in his ears, gravity working on grief just like everything else. The knocking on the door continued, more insistent now. Ethan finally stood, crossed the room in 3 strides, yanked it open hard enough to make the chain lock rattle. Victoria stood there, still in her reception dress but barefoot, sand clinging to her feet like she'd walked the beach for hours. Blake's suit jacket hung over her shoulders, and his handkerchief wrapped her cut hand, blood seeping through the monogram. "May I come in?" Ethan stepped aside. She entered carefully, like she might shatter if she moved too fast. Her eyes went straight to Nora. "I know who you are," Victoria said. "Not the woman from the hospice, not the woman who feeds stray dogs. I know who you really are. We've established that you—" "No." Victoria shook her head, and her hair, which had been pinned up in elaborate curls for the wedding, fell around her shoulders. "I mean from before. From when we were young." The room's air conditioner kicked on, blowing air that smelled like other people's perfume and cigarettes from when smoking was still allowed. "You're Sarah's mother, Sarah Haven, from Camp South, summer of 1999. Victoria's hands shook as she held the letter. Notebook paper, 3-hole punched, the kind every teenager used for passing notes in study hall. The paper rustled like autumn leaves, that thin sound cheap paper makes when it's been handled too many times. Her lips moved silently as she read, forming words written 16 years ago in purple ink. Sarah always used purple, said it was more hopeful than blue, more serious than pink. Ethan watched the color drain from Victoria's face like water from a bathtub. Her breathing changed, short little gasps through her nose, the way people breathe when they're trying not to cry in public. The cut on her palm had opened again, a thin line of blood creeping toward her wrist, following the lifeline like a map to somewhere painful. "She actually loved me," Victoria whispered. "Sarah actually... She wasn't just being polite." The hotel room door burst open hard enough to bang against the wall, leaving a dent in the plaster. Blake stood there breathing like he'd run up all 3 flights instead of taking the elevator. His morning coat was gone, shirt untucked and wrinkled, looking more like a man who'd been in a bar fight than a lawyer who'd just gotten married. Behind him, Father Frank leaned against the doorframe, his black cassock dark with sweat, rosary beads clicking in his hand. "We have a problem," Blake said, holding up a manila envelope, the thick kind lawyers used for documents that changed lives. Water stains darkened one corner where someone had spilled their drink at the reception. Victoria looked up from Sarah's letter, mascara making fresh tracks down her cheeks. "Not now, Blake. George's attorney is downstairs. He's been drinking since the ceremony. Started talking about sealed documents." Blake set the envelope on the dresser, next to the hotel Bible that nobody ever read. His fingers left damp prints on the wood veneer. "Documents about why your father really changed his will." Father Frank entered the room, closing the door soft as a confession booth. His knees cracked when he lowered himself into the desk chair. 72 years of genuflecting had taken their toll. "I tried to stop him from talking," the priest said, "but 3 scotches loosened his tongue. He said Victoria had a right to know the truth." Nora hadn't moved from her spot by the window. Ethan saw her fingers curl slightly, knuckles white as communion wafers. Blake opened the envelope with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd delivered bad news before. Papers whispered against each other as he pulled them out. Email transcripts. Between Victoria and George, starting 3 years ago. Victoria stood, Sarah's letter fluttering to the floor like a dying butterfly. Those were private. Attorney-client privilege. George printed everything. Blake's voice had gone into what Ethan recognized as his courtroom tone. Neutral as tap water, just facts without feeling. Had them notarized, dated, witnessed by his secretary. He handed the first page to Ethan. The paper felt heavy, important, the way legal documents always did. Victoria lunged for it, but Blake caught her wrist, gentle but firm, like holding a bird that might fly away. "He needs to see. Blake said. Ethan read. His jaw tightened with each line, that muscle below his ear working like he was chewing glass. From v.whitmore@whitmoreindustries.com to g.whitmore@whitmoreindustries.com. Date, March 15th, 3 years ago. Subject, Ethan Chase. Daddy, you asked why I care if Chase's construction company succeeds. I'll tell you exactly why. Because every dollar he makes, every building he completes, every success he achieves, proves I chose wrong. I chose Blake's security over Ethan's struggle. I chose guaranteed comfort over uncertain love. I need him to fail. I need to know I didn't throw away my only chance at happiness for nothing. The City Council meets Thursday. Commissioner Hayes owes you from the marina development deal. One word from you about Chase's building permits would start the ball rolling. Ethan's hand trembled. The paper made small, rattling sounds, like a bird trapped in a box. There's more, Blake said, pulling out page after page. Each email showed Victoria orchestrating Ethan's destruction through her father, suggesting which suppliers to pressure, Harrison Lumber, who had extended credit to George during the recession, which banks to call, First National, where George sat on the board, which inspectors to influence, Murphy from the building department, who'd been George's fraternity brother at UW. Father Frank crossed himself, the gesture automatic as breathing. The final email was dated 6 months before George died. Daddy, Ethan's company is hemorrhaging money. Another month, maybe 2, and he'll have to declare bankruptcy. When he's ruined, when he has nothing, maybe I'll finally stop seeing his face every time Blake touches me. Maybe I'll stop wondering what our children would have looked like. Would they have had his eyes or my stubborn chin? Maybe I'll stop hating myself for being too afraid of being poor to choose being loved. Love is weakness. You taught me that after Mother left. Help me prove it's true. Your daughter, the only one who stayed, Victoria. Ethan set the papers on the nightstand, careful as handling nitroglycerin. His breathing sounded loud in the quiet room. The air conditioner had shut off, leaving only the distant sound of waves and seagulls fighting over tourists' forgotten sandwiches. You destroyed me, he said, voice level as a spirit level. Not your father. You. Victoria backed against the window, sunset light outlining her like she was on fire. I was hurting. You were calculating. Ethan's voice stayed steady, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. Every permit denial that cost me weeks of delays, every canceled contract that meant laying off workers, good men with families, every investigation that drained my savings, you planned it all. Daddy could have said no. He could have refused. He was dying. Nora spoke for the first time since Blake's arrival. Dying people do desperate things to keep their children close, even terrible things. Blake pulled out another document. There's one more thing. George's response to that last email. He wrote it but never sent it. He handed it to Nora. She read it silently, her face giving away nothing. 30 years of sitting with the dying had taught her to keep her reactions private. Read it out loud, Ethan said. Nora looked at Victoria, then began, her teacher's voice carrying clear despite its softness. My dearest Victoria, I've done everything you asked. The permits, the suppliers, the investigation, all set in motion like dominoes falling. But I need you to know something. You're wrong about love being weakness. It's the only strength that matters. I loved your mother despite her leaving. I love you despite what you've become. This cold, calculating woman who measures everything in dollars and revenge. And that boy, Ethan, he loved you despite having nothing to offer but his hands and his heart and his dreams of building something together. I'm destroying him because you asked me to, because I'm weak and dying and terrified of losing the only family I have left. But I pray, yes, I've started praying again, Father Frank would be amazed, that someday you'll understand what we've done, what I've allowed you to do. When I'm gone, you'll have my money, every penny of the 20 million, but you won't have what he offered you. You won't have someone who knew you at your worst and still chose to stay. I'm ashamed of us both. Your father, who failed you. The room fell silent except for the air conditioner clicking back on, blowing cold air that smelled like mildew and old cigarette smoke from when the hotel still allowed it. He knew, Victoria said, her voice hollow as a reed. He knew it was wrong, but did it anyway. To keep you close, Father Frank said. The same reason you destroyed Ethan. To keep the pain close. Sometimes familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar happiness. Ethan picked up the stack of emails, papers rustling like angry whispers. These are evidence. Criminal conspiracy, bribery. I could destroy you with these, Victoria. Blake's career, your father's reputation, everything. Victoria didn't move from the window. Behind her, the sun was setting into the Pacific, painting everything the color of old blood. Do it. Victoria, Blake started. Do it, she repeated. I killed my father's soul before the cancer took his body. I turned him into a weapon against the only man who ever loved me without conditions. Destroy me. I've earned it. Nora stepped between them. No. You don't get a vote, Ethan said. You knew. You knew what she'd done and you said nothing. I knew what George had done, what Victoria had asked him to do, but I also knew what revealing it would do to her, a woman already drowning in self-hatred. She deserves. What? Revenge? Justice? Nora turned to face Ethan fully. Your company survived. You rebuilt. You're here, successful, alive. But look at her. Everyone looked. Victoria stood silhouetted against the dying light, blood on her palm, tears dried to salt on her cheeks, still in her wedding dress, but looking like she'd already attended her own funeral. She's been imprisoned for 8 years, Nora continued. A prison she built herself, adding bars every time she chose fear over love. Father Frank stood, his knees protesting with sounds like breaking kindling. There's something else. Something George told me in his final confession. He gave me permission to share it after his death. Blake pulled out his phone, started recording. For legal protection, he explained. The priest waited for the red recording light. George Whitmore left something else, not in his official will, hidden. $50 million in a trust. Victoria's legs gave out. She slid down the window to the floor, wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. The beneficiary, Father Frank continued, his voice steady as Sunday Mass, is Ethan Chase. The window behind Victoria exploded. A seagull lay twitching on the hotel carpet, its neck bent wrong, like somebody had tried to fold it in half. Glass pieces caught the last of the sunset, scattered across the floor like diamonds at a jewelry store robbery. The October wind roared through the broken window, sending the curtains straight out like flags surrendering, scattering George's emails across the room like giant confetti at a parade nobody wanted. Victoria screamed, short and sharp, like touching a hot stove. Blood ran down her shoulder, where a piece of glass had caught her, spreading through the white satin of her reception dress, following the delicate stitching her grandmother had sewn by hand in 1952. Nobody move, Blake commanded, using his courtroom voice. He grabbed a bath towel from the bathroom, pressed it against Victoria's shoulder. The white terry cloth turned red faster than ice cream melting in July. There's glass everywhere. Father Frank's cassock whipped around in the wind like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. He pulled the curtains closed, trying to block the gale, but the fabric just ballooned right back out, fighting him. We need to get her downstairs, Nora said, standing carefully. Glass crunched under her flat shoes. Sensible shoes, the kind nurses wore. That cut needs looking at. Victoria pushed Blake's hands away. The towel fell to the floor, already soaked through. Don't touch me. She stood, her bare feet somehow finding the clear spots between glass shards, like she was walking on water. The wind plastered her ruined dress against her body, outlining her like those paper dolls children used to play with. She looked at the dead seagull,
its one black eye still reflecting the room, still seeing everything and nothing.
"Even birds know when to quit," she said, and her laugh came out broken as the window. "Smarter than people." She walked to the door, glass crunching under her feet now, leaving bloody footprints like rose petals scattered at a different kind of ceremony. "Victoria!" Blake reached for her. "The wedding's off." She didn't turn around. "Tell the guests whatever you want. Tell them the truth. The bride's a monster who destroyed everyone who loved her." "You're bleeding." "Good." She left. Her footsteps faded down the hallway, getting fainter like a radio station going out of range. The elevator dinged once. Blake looked at his hands, Victoria's blood on his palms, under his manicured nails. "I should go after her." "No." Nora picked up Sarah's letter from the floor where it had fallen, folded it carefully along its worn creases. "She needs to break all the way before she can start healing." "That's cruel." "That's necessary. Like re-breaking a bone that healed wrong." Ethan grabbed his suit jacket from the chair. "I'm going after her." Father Frank caught his arm, his grip stronger than a 72-year-old priest should have. "Son, sometimes the kindest thing." The fire alarm shrieked like a banshee, cutting off his words. Red lights flashed in the hallway, turning everything the color of emergency. Not a drill. Smoke was already visible, creeping out from the stairwell like fog in a horror movie. "Kitchen fire," Blake said. "During the reception, someone mentioned grease on the stove." The sprinklers kicked on. Water hammered down cold as January rain, soaking everything in seconds. George's emails turned to pulp, the ink running like mascara at a funeral. The blood on the carpet went pink, spreading toward the door like spilled wine at communion. They ran for the stairs. 3 flights down, the smoke thickened like morning fog on the coast, but wrong-colored, wrong-smelling. Other guests pushed past, wedding clothes plastered to bodies, makeup running, children crying that confused, frightened wail when they don't understand why the adults are scared. Someone fell on the wet stairs. Someone else helped them up. The Zimmermans from room 205, still in their reception clothes. Mrs. Henderson from the church auxiliary, her hat lost somewhere in the chaos. Outside, the parking lot filled with evacuated guests, like some strange outdoor party nobody planned. The wedding party clustered in confused groups, bridesmaids looking like drowned cats in their matching lavender dresses, groomsmen with bow ties undone and confused expressions. A fire truck wailed closer, its siren bouncing off the buildings. "Where's Victoria?" Margaret Ross appeared, still wearing her reception dress, but with a kitchen apron over it. She'd been helping serve cake, always helping, that woman. "I saw her heading toward the beach, walking into the surf." Ethan turned toward the Pacific. The sun had set, leaving only a green glow on the horizon, like the ocean was radioactive. The beach stretched empty as a funeral parlor after hours, except for... there. A figure in white, walking into the waves. Ethan ran. Sand grabbed at his dress shoes like quicksand. He kicked them off, kept running. Behind him, footsteps, multiple people following. The October Pacific hit his feet first, cold enough to make his bones ache. 50 degrees if it was anything. Victoria stood waist-deep in the surf. Wave lifted her dress, spreading it out like a jellyfish nobody wanted to touch. She walked deeper with each receding wave, using the undertow's pull like a handrail guiding her home. "Victoria, stop!" Ethan plunged in, the cold hitting like a punch to the solar plexus. She didn't turn around. A wave bigger than the others crashed over her shoulders. She went under. Ethan dove. Salt water burned his eyes like lye soap. In the murky water, he saw white fabric floating, grabbed for it. His hands closed on nothing, just water and seaweed and the terrible emptiness of missing what you're reaching for. He surfaced, gasping. Another wave slammed into him, driving him backward, filling his mouth with salt water that tasted like tears. He saw her, 10 feet further out now, just her hair visible,
floating on the surface like kelp.
Someone passed him, Nora, swimming hard despite her dress dragging her down. She reached Victoria just as another wave crashed over them both. They disappeared into the white foam like sugar dissolving in coffee. Ethan swam toward where they'd been. His suit jacket weighed him down like wearing chains. He couldn't get it off. The wet fabric stuck to him like a second skin. His lungs burned worse than the time he'd had pneumonia. Nora surfaced with Victoria's head locked in the crook of her elbow, the lifeguard hold they taught at the YMCA. Victoria fought like a caught fish, clawing at Nora's arm, twisting, trying to break free and sink. "Let me go!" Victoria's scream cut through the wind and waves. "Let me!" A wave separated them. Nora lost her grip. Victoria slipped under like a stone. Ethan dove again. This time his hand found hair. He pulled. Victoria came up swinging, her fist connecting with his jaw hard enough to make him see stars like the 4th of July. He held on anyway. Nora grabbed Victoria's other arm. Together they dragged her through the breakers, waves trying to pull them back like the ocean wanted to keep her. Victoria had gone limp, dead weight now, coughing up seawater mixed with wedding cake and champagne. They collapsed on wet sand just as the next wave rolled in. It tumbled them sideways like clothes in a washing machine. Ethan tasted sand and salt and blood from where Victoria had split his lip. Blake appeared from nowhere, pulling Victoria further up the beach, away from the hungry waves. Father Frank wrapped his cassock around her. She was shaking, violent as a seizure, from cold or shock or both. "Why?" Victoria's voice came out raw, like she'd been gargling broken glass. She looked at Nora, who was on her hands and knees, coughing up Pacific Ocean. "Why save me?" Nora spat out seawater mixed with blood. She'd bitten her tongue during the struggle. Her gray hair hung in wet ropes like a mop that needed wringing. "Because that's what people do," she said between coughs. "That's not an answer." "Because your father couldn't." Nora's voice broke on the words like waves on rocks. "That last night, he tried to get out of bed. Said he heard you crying, had to get to you. He fell trying to reach his wheelchair. Broke his hip on the hardwood floor he'd installed when you were born." Victoria curled into herself on the sand, knees to chest, making a sound that wasn't quite human. The sound grief makes when it's too big for a body to hold. "He lay there for 20 minutes before I found him," Nora continued. "Wouldn't let me call an ambulance. Said he didn't want to die in a hospital, so I stayed with him on that floor. Read him poetry while he lay dying. Held his hand while he called your name." "Stop." "He died 12 hours later, still calling for you. Still trying to save you from becoming him." Victoria's sobs quieted to hiccups, then to silence. Just the sound of waves and sirens and seagulls fighting over something dead. "The emails," Blake said suddenly, like he'd just remembered. "They're gone. Destroyed in the sprinklers." Ethan felt his pocket. The sodden mass that had been evidence of Victoria's betrayal was now just paper pulp, words dissolved like sugar in rain. "Good," he said. Father Frank knelt beside Victoria in the sand, speaking too low for the others to hear over the waves. Her sobs started again, but different, cleaner somehow, like poison being drawn from a wound. "There's something else," Nora said. Her hand went to her chest, pressing hard. Her face had gone gray as her wet hair. "Nora?" Ethan moved toward her. She fell sideways into the sand, body rigid as driftwood, then limp as seaweed at low tide. The emergency room at Cannon Beach Medical Center smelled like every hospital since the beginning of time. Bleach, trying to cover something worse. That sharp, antiseptic smell that got into your nose and stayed there. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, making everyone look sicker than they probably were. Ethan's clothes had dried stiff with salt, cracking when he moved like he was wearing cardboard. Victoria sat 3 plastic chairs away, still in her ruined wedding dress, Blake's suit jacket over her shoulders. Water dripped from her hair onto the speckled linoleum, making little puddles that reflected the harsh lights. Father Frank paced the waiting area, his waterlogged cassock leaving wet footprints that the janitor would mop up later. Every few steps he'd touch the wooden cross at his chest, lips moving in what looked like the rosary, though no sound came out. Margaret Ross pushed through the double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only," her nurse's face giving away nothing. 30 years at Mercy General had taught her to keep her expressions neutral as tap water. She still wore her reception outfit, though she'd found scrubs somewhere to throw over it. "She's stable," Margaret said, voice professional. "But she needs to tell you something. All of you." They followed her through corridors that echoed with the sounds hospitals make: beeping machines, distant crying, the squeak of gurney wheels that needed oiling. The ICU bay was separated by those green curtains that never quite gave enough privacy. Nora lay propped up in the bed, an oxygen tube under her nose making soft hissing sounds. IV dripping clear fluid into her arm at precisely 15 drops per minute. "Congestive heart failure," Nora said before anyone could ask, her voice raspy from the salt water. "Started 2 years ago. Been getting worse." Victoria made a sound, half gasp, half sob, muffled by Blake's jacket. "How long?" Ethan's question came out rough as sandpaper. "Months, maybe weeks." Nora adjusted the oxygen tube that had shifted when she talked. "Depends on how stubborn this old heart decides to be." Father Frank crossed himself, the gesture automatic as blinking. Blake pulled out his phone like he was going to record something, then put it away. Some moments were too private even for lawyers. "There's something else," Nora said. She reached under the thin hospital pillow, pulled out an envelope. Somehow it had stayed dry through everything. She must have had Margaret retrieve it from somewhere. "George made me promise to give this to you, Ethan." But only if Victoria was present, and broken enough to hear it. Her gray eyes moved to Victoria, studying her like a teacher evaluating whether a student was ready for a hard lesson. "Are you broken enough?" Victoria's laugh came out bitter as black coffee. "I tried to drown myself an hour ago. Does that qualify?" "That's despair, not breaking. Breaking is when you stop defending the walls you've built and start accepting what is." Victoria pulled Blake's jacket tighter around her shoulders. "Just give him the letter." Nora handed the envelope to Ethan. His name was written across it in shaking script, George's handwriting in his final days, when the morphine made his hands tremble. Inside were 3 sheets of paper, the expensive kind lawyers used for important documents. Ethan read aloud, his voice echoing off the medical equipment. "Ethan, by the time you read this, I'll be dead, and my daughter will be destroyed. Both are my fault. This letter is my attempt at making things right, not for me, but for you both. First, the facts. I have placed $50 million in an irrevocable trust. It becomes yours the moment Victoria admits what she did, not to authorities, but to you, face to face, human to human. Second, the conditions. The money must establish free hospice care for those who can't afford to die with dignity. Not because I found God at the end, though Father Frank certainly tried, but because I learned something from the woman carrying this letter. Nora Haven came to me by accident, or so I thought. I was having everyone investigated, paranoid habit from 40 years of hostile takeovers. When I learned who she was, Sarah's mother, the professor who lost everything, the woman who chose to serve rather than surrender, I realized something. My daughter's only real friend, the only person who ever loved her without wanting something, had a mother who embodied everything I failed to teach Victoria. That love isn't possession. That strength isn't walls. That wealth isn't money. So I did what any desperate father would do. I made sure Nora would stay. Not with money, she refused every offer, but by being so difficult, so cruel to the other nurses that only someone with her patience would remain. I spent 3 months watching this woman who had every reason to be bitter choose kindness instead. Watching her feed stray dogs with food she needed. watching her hold the hands of dying strangers, watching her forgive a world that took everything from her. And I realized my daughter didn't need an inheritance. She needed an example. Ethan's hands shook slightly, making the paper rattle. The heart monitor next to Nora's bed beeped steadily, 68 beats per minute, a little fast for someone at rest. What else? Victoria stood, swaying slightly like she might faint. The fluorescent lights made her skin look green. What's the last part? Ethan continued. Ethan, I destroyed you because Victoria asked me to, but also because I wanted to. You represented my failure, the poor but decent man who loved my daughter better than I ever did. If you succeeded after she left you, it meant she chose wrong. It meant I raised her wrong. But here's what I learned too late. We all choose wrong. Every day. The miracle is in choosing again, choosing better, choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, forgiveness over revenge. The money is yours. Build something that matters. But more importantly, forgive my daughter. Not for her sake, for yours. Carrying hate is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Nora taught me that, though she'd never take credit. One last thing. Ethan stopped. His hands trembled worse now, making the paper shake like leaves in wind. What? Victoria moved closer, leaving wet footprints on the hospital floor. Victoria finally breaking. Nora revealing who she is. I'm not proud of the manipulation, but I'm not sorry either. Sometimes the only way to save people is to break them first. Ask Nora about the poetry she read me. Ask her about the night I tried to crawl to Victoria's old room. Ask her about Grace. I remain unworthy but trying. George Whitmore. P.S. The trust has a second beneficiary if you refuse it. The Catholic Church. Father Frank has been instructed to build a cathedral with it. You know how much I hated organized religion. Don't let my money go to stained glass. Build something useful. The letter trembled in Ethan's hands like something alive trying to escape. Victoria had moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the dark glass, staring at something none of them could see. You knew, Victoria said to Nora, her voice flat as roadkill. You knew everything. Who I was, what I'd done, what Daddy planned. I knew George was trying to fix what he broke. By breaking me more? By forcing you to see yourself clearly. Nora adjusted her oxygen again. The flow meter showed 6 liters now. Higher than before, higher than was good. Your father didn't leave you money because money was your drug. Like giving whiskey to an alcoholic. Blake stepped forward, always the lawyer, even in crisis. The trust. Is it real? Legal? Father Frank pulled papers from inside his wet cassock, water-damaged but readable. I have copies, witnessed, notarized, all perfectly legal. 50 million. Blake's mind was working, calculating. That's more than George's estate was worth. The house, the investments, everything together was maybe 30 million. He liquidated everything else privately, Father Frank explained. The art collection, his stake in Whitmore Industries, even sold the family burial plots. Did it all through intermediaries so Victoria wouldn't know. Victoria turned from the window, her reflection lingering for a moment like a ghost that didn't want to leave. He sold the company? Our family's company that Grandpa started in 1952? He sold everything that mattered to him, Nora said, her breathing getting more labored despite the oxygen, to save the only thing that actually mattered. Me? Victoria's voice cracked like ice in spring. The possibility of you. The woman you could become if you stopped being afraid. Margaret checked her watch, the sturdy Timex she'd worn since nursing school. Visiting hours end in, please. Victoria moved to Nora's bedside. Tell me about his last night. All of it. Everything. Nora looked at the monitors surrounding her. Blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation, all the numbers that measured a body but not a soul. The blood pressure cuff inflated automatically, squeezing her thin arm like a python.
He tried to get out of bed at 3 in the morning. Said he heard you crying. You weren't there, hadn't visited in 3 days, but he heard you anyway. Tried to get to his wheelchair by himself. Hip shattered when he hit the floor. That old hardwood he'd installed when you were born, no give to it at all. Victoria covered her mouth with both hands, but the sob escaped anyway. He lay there for 20 minutes before I found him. Refused to let me call an ambulance. Said he didn't want to die in some sterile hospital. So I stayed on the floor with him. Read him poetry, Yeats, Frost, even some Emily Dickinson, though he pretended not to like her.
Held his hand while he talked about you. What did he say? He said you were 5 when you first rode a horse, Butterscotch, a Palomino at the Turner's stable. 7 when your mother left. 8 when you stopped crying. 13 when you stopped laughing. 26 when you chose safety over love. 36 when you realized safety was just another kind of dying. Slower, but just as final. The heart monitor's rhythm changed. Faster now, irregular, skipping beats like a scratched record. Margaret moved quickly, checking connections, adjusting drip rates. Her heart rate's climbing. 110? 120? I'm fine. Nora waved her away weakly. Just need to finish this story. She looked directly at Victoria. Your father's last words weren't about regret or God or fear. They were, tell Victoria I finally understand. Love isn't something you fall into. It's something you rise to. Tell her to rise. Victoria collapsed into the bedside chair, her wet wedding dress pooling around her like melted ice cream. But I can't. I don't know how to rise. I only know how to sink. Nora reached out, took Victoria's hand. Her fingers were cold, too cold for a room this warm. Then learn. That's what the money's really for. Buying you time to learn. Ethan moved closer. The hospice center. We'll teach her. Nora squeezed Victoria's hand with what little strength she had left. Death teaches us how to live. The dying teach us what matters. George knew that. He wanted Victoria to learn it too. Blake cleared his throat. The wedding guests are still at the hotel, waiting for word about everything. Victoria looked at him, really looked at him for the first time all day. Tell them the truth. The bride tried to kill herself, was saved by a dying woman, and discovered her father sold everything to teach her how to love. Tell them the wedding's off. Tell them to go home. Tell them... She stopped, looking at Nora. Tell them sometimes grace comes dressed as disaster. The heart monitor alarmed, sharp, insistent, the sound that makes nurses run. Margaret pushed buttons, adjusted flow rates, moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. Everyone out, Margaret ordered, using her charge nurse voice. Now. As they filed toward the door, Nora called out weakly, Ethan. He turned back. The trust, she whispered, barely audible over the alarms. There's something else, something George didn't put in the letter. He moved closer, leaning down to hear her over the beeping machines and Margaret's urgent movements. The 50 million. It's not real. It never existed. 1 year later. The Whitmore Chase Compassion Center occupied a converted fish cannery on the Cannon Beach waterfront. The October wind carried salt spray through the open windows, mixing with the smell of fresh paint and sawdust from the ongoing renovations. Victoria stood on an aluminum ladder, adjusting a wooden sign that read, Every ending is a beginning. George Whitmore. Her hands, once manicured weekly at the salon on Mercer Street, now bore calluses from months of hammering, painting, and building something from nothing. Left side needs to come up about 2 inches, Michael Torres said from below, holding the ladder steady. His hands had the permanent stains of wood finish under the nails, the kind that didn't wash out no matter how much lava soap you used. Maybe 3. Victoria shifted the sign, using the level to check it. The bubble centered between the lines. Better? Perfect. She climbed down, and Michael's hand briefly touched her waist. Steadying, not possessive. She didn't pull away. 6 months ago, she would have. 6 months ago, she still flinched when anyone got too close, like she was made of glass that might shatter. Through the window, she could see Ethan directing a delivery truck backing up to the loading dock. He wore jeans and a t-shirt that said Compassion Center Volunteer in faded letters. The suit and tie were gone, sold, along with his penthouse apartment, his Audi, everything that wasn't essential. The money had gone into this place, every penny. "Nora's here," Michael said. The wheelchair came through the door, slowly, Nora pushing herself with determination that bordered on stubbornness. The oxygen tank strapped to the back hissed softly with each breath she took. 6 months ago, the doctors had given her 3 weeks. She'd decided their timeline was more of a suggestion than a rule. "The bed's arrived," Nora said, slightly breathless. "Margaret's directing the setup in the main ward." Victoria knelt beside the wheelchair, a gesture that had become automatic. "You should rest. Dr. Morrison said I should have been dead last Christmas." Nora smiled, the kind that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I'm not very good at following medical advice." Storm hobbled in behind her, that 3-legged dog still managing to find every dropped crumb in a 100-yard radius. Someone had spilled crackers near the coffee station. Storm's version of heaven. "Blake called," Nora continued. "He's coming today." Victoria's hand stilled on the wheelchair handle. "Why?" "Says he has something to tell you. Something important." Through the window, Victoria watched Ethan sign for packages. They'd built this place together, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. First, they'd both sold everything. His business, her jewelry, the things that had seemed important before they learned what actually mattered. Then the crowdfunding campaign Margaret had set up. $50,000 from strangers who'd heard their story. Then grants, loans, and mysterious envelopes of cash that arrived every Monday. No return address, always exactly what they needed to keep going. Blake arrived at 4:30, just as the sun was starting to slant through the windows. He looked different, thinner, wearing jeans and a University of Washington sweatshirt instead of his usual 3-piece suit. His Mercedes had been replaced by a Honda Civic with a dent in the front bumper. "Hello, Victoria." She continued folding sheets for the hospice beds. White cotton, the kind that got softer with each washing. "Blake, I came to apologize. Not necessary. Very necessary." He stepped inside, the old floorboards creaking under his feet. They'd salvaged them from George's house before it was demolished. "I knew what you were doing to Ethan. I helped research his vulnerabilities, found which permits to challenge, which inspectors might be influenced. I was your accomplice." Victoria set down the sheet she'd been folding. "We all did what we thought we had to do." "No, we did what was easier than being honest." Blake pulled out an envelope. "The annulment papers, signed. No conditions, no financial obligations. And this." He handed her a check. Victoria looked at it. $20,000? Every month. Anonymous donor wants to support the center. Insists I deliver it personally. "It's you. You're the anonymous donor." The donor prefers to remain anonymous. But his smile gave him away. The first genuine smile she'd seen from him in 4 years of knowing him. She studied his face, noticing things she'd missed before. "You're different. You met someone." "How did you—" "Your ring. Right hand instead of left. European style." Victoria had learned to notice details during her father's illness, watching for signs of change, improvement, decline. "European girlfriend?" "Wife. French. A teacher at the community college." Blake's whole face changed when he talked about her. "Marie thinks Americans work too much, worry too much, forget to enjoy simple things. She's teaching me to make bread from scratch. Can you imagine? Me making bread?" "Good for you, Blake. Really." Margaret Ross burst through the door, moving fast for a woman in her 60s. "First patient arrives tomorrow. terminal pancreatic cancer, same as—" She stopped, noticing Blake. "Same as George," Victoria finished. "I know. I specifically requested him." 2 months later. The center hummed with controlled chaos. The good kind, the kind that meant life was happening. 8 patients and residents, 12 volunteers, 3 nurses working shifts. Victoria moved between the beds, checking charts, adjusting pillows, learning the rhythm of ending that was also beginning. Room 3 held Mr. Samuel Reeves, 83, lung cancer that had spread to everything. He'd been asking for someone to read to him. His eyes couldn't focus on print anymore. Victoria picked up the book from his nightstand. "Yeats?" "That lady in the wheelchair suggested it." His voice rattled like marbles in a can. "Says poetry helps with the crossing." She read The Lake Isle of Innisfree while Samuel's breathing slowed. When she finished, tears ran sideways down his face, pooling in his ears the way tears do when you're lying down. "My Dorothy loved that poem," he whispered. "Read it at our wedding. 1963. St. Paul's Methodist. She wore her mother's dress. Tell me about her." He did. 2 hours of stories while Victoria held his hand, how they met at a dance, how she couldn't cook but tried anyway, how she sang in the church choir, off-key but with enthusiasm. This was her job now, though they called her volunteer coordinator. Her real job was witness. Nora had taught her that dying people don't need advice or wisdom or even comfort sometimes. They need someone to hear their story. Ethan found her there at midnight, still holding Samuel's hand, though he'd passed an hour ago, peaceful as Sunday morning. "The family's here," he said softly. She stood, knees protesting from hours in the chair. "He went easy. Talked about Dorothy right up to the end." "They always go easy with you." Outside Samuel's room, she leaned against the wall, feeling the weight of another story ending. "I understand now why Nora does this." "Tell me." "Every death teaches us about life. Every ending shows us what mattered." She looked at him. "I spent 8 years afraid of losing things. Money, status, control. Now I help people lose everything. And somehow, I'm less afraid." Nora wheeled past, heading for the night shift rounds. Her breathing was labored, even with the oxygen turned up to maximum flow. "You should be sleeping," Victoria called. "Sleep's overrated." Nora disappeared into room 7. Little Lucy, 6 years old, leukemia. She was afraid of the dark. Nora would sit with her all night, telling stories about Storm's adventures until dawn came through the windows. Michael appeared with coffee, black, no sugar, the way Victoria had learned to drink it when cream and sugar became luxuries they couldn't afford. He'd been there since 6 that morning, building wheelchair ramps, fixing leaky faucets, making broken things work. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "After your therapy session?" "It's not a good time." "It's never a good time. That's why we make time." She looked at this man who showed up every day, who fixed things without being asked, who'd learned how she took her coffee without asking, who knew about the baby she'd lost years ago, the miscarriage nobody talked about, the grief she'd buried under anger. "Okay." His smile changed his whole face, like sun breaking through Oregon clouds. "Okay." 6 months after that. The beach ceremony was nothing like Victoria's first wedding. 20 people instead of 200. Wildflowers picked that morning instead of roses flown in from Ecuador. Victoria wore a cotton dress from Goodwill, cream-colored, simple, honest. $7 including the belt. Michael waited by the driftwood arch he'd built himself, his brothers beside him. All contractors, all wearing their best jeans and shirts they'd actually ironed for the occasion. The arch was decorated with kelp and shells Lucy had collected before she passed, insisting they save them for Miss Victoria's happy day. Ethan walked Victoria down the beach. No aisle, just sand that grabbed at her bare feet. "You sure about this?" "No," she smiled, "but doing it anyway." That's the only kind of sure that matters. Nora waited in her wheelchair, bundled in quilts despite the warm September day. She'd gotten ordained online last month, said it was on her bucket list, right after see the northern lights and before eat a whole pie by myself. The oxygen tank hissed with each labored breath, but she'd insisted on doing this. Marriage, Nora began, her voice thin but carrying over the sound of waves, is not a contract or a transaction. It's a translation. Learning to speak another person's language of love. Michael took Victoria's hands, rough from work, warm, steady as his heartbeat. Victoria, he said, I promise to love you on the hard days, the days you can't get out of bed, the days you see your father in the mirror, the days the grief hits out of nowhere like a rogue wave. I promise to love you, not despite your broken parts, but because of how beautifully you're rebuilding. Victoria's vows came out through tears. Michael, I promise to stay. Even when staying is scary, even when leaving would be easier, even when I don't know how to love you right. I promise to keep trying, keep learning, keep choosing you. That was all. That was everything. Storm barked. He'd eaten the rings. Again. Chaos erupted while everyone searched pockets. Margaret pulled backup rings from her purse. Always carry spares, she said. Learned that from 40 years of weddings going sideways. Father Frank, who'd insisted on participating even though Nora was officiating, blessed the union with holy water he'd mixed with Pacific Ocean water. Half sacred, half salty, he said. Like marriage. Blake stood in the back with Marie, his French wife who'd taught him to make croissants from scratch. They'd brought real champagne, not the expensive kind, but the happy kind, the kind you drink from paper cups and don't care. As the sun set, turning everything gold, they sat on driftwood logs. No reception hall, no 5-course dinner, just sandwiches Margaret made, beer from the local brewery, Michael's cousin playing guitar, badly, but with enthusiasm that made up for missed chords. Are you happy? Ethan asked Victoria. She watched Michael teaching his nephews to skip stones, watched Nora feeding Storm bits of sandwich despite everyone telling her not to, felt the salt wind on her face. I'm present. That's better than happy. Happy comes and goes. Present stays. A little girl ran up, one of the hospice patient's grandchildren, gap-toothed and serious. Miss Victoria, is the lady in the wheelchair an angel? Grandma says angels come when people are dying, and that lady's always with the dying people. Victoria looked at Nora, who was pretending not to listen. No, sweetheart, she's better than an angel. What's better than an angel? A regular person who chooses to help even though she's hurting too. The child considered this with the seriousness only 5-year-olds can manage, then ran back to building sandcastles. Father Frank started a bonfire as darkness fell. The hospice patients who could walk had come to the beach, wheelchairs in sand, walkers sinking with each step. But they came. They sang old songs. This land is your land. Amazing grace. You are my sunshine. The songs everyone knows, the ones that live in your bones. Victoria stood, still in her wedding dress. I want to say something. The group quieted, flames crackling, waves persistent as heartbeats. 2 years ago, I tried to die in this ocean. Nora pulled me out, not just from the water, from the person I'd become. Someone who measured everything in dollars, who chose safety over love, who built walls so high I couldn't see over them. She looked at each face in the firelight, these people who'd become family. My father lied about the money. There was no 50 million, but he told the truth about wealth. It's all of you. This strange family built from broken pieces. This place we made from nothing but stubbornness and grace. She walked to where George's portrait sat propped against a log, the only thing she'd kept from his house. Under it, she'd written his words. Love isn't something you fall into. It's something you rise to. I'm still rising, she said. Every day,
Inch by inch, I'm learning to rise.
3 months later. Nora's breathing changed at 3 a.m. Victoria knew the sound. She'd heard it dozens of times now. The rattle that meant hours, not days. They moved her to room 1, the corner room with windows facing the ocean. Storm curled under her bed, refusing to move even for food. Ethan sat on one side, Victoria on the other. Michael brought coffee. Margaret checked vitals that didn't matter anymore, except to mark time. Father Frank gave last rites to a woman who'd never been Catholic, but accepted them because Father Frank needed to do something.
Tell me about Sarah,
Nora whispered, each word an effort. Victoria pulled out the old photo. 2 13-year-old girls at summer camp, arms around each other, matching friendship bracelets, standing in front of a hand-painted banner, best friends forever, no matter what.
She was brave, Victoria said.
Scared of spiders but held them anyway to prove fear didn't control her. Terrible at swimming, but jumped off the high dive because someone dared her. Wrote poetry in purple pen because she said rebellion should be beautiful. Like her mother, Ethan said. Nora smiled, her eyes already seeing something beyond the room. She would have loved this place. All these people choosing to help each other. Her breathing slowed. The sun began to rise, painting the ocean gold and pink and impossible colors that don't have names.
Victoria,
Nora's voice barely a whisper now.
the donations. Every month. The anonymous money.
What about it?
Your father. He didn't lie completely. He set aside money. Not 50 million, but enough. Through Blake. Enough to keep this place running. Forever.
Victoria looked at Blake, who stood in the doorway. He nodded once. But why the deception? Because, Nora's eyes found each of them, you had to build it first, with your own hands, your own sacrifice, your own love. Otherwise, it would have been his dream, not yours. The sun cleared the horizon. Light flooded the room like water, like forgiveness, like grace.
I'm not afraid,
Nora said.
We know,
Victoria whispered.
because you're here. All of you. Nobody should die alone.
She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. Stopped. Started. Stopped. At 6:47 a.m., as church bells rang for early mass, Nora Haven died, surrounded by the family she'd built from strangers. 5 years later. The Whitmore Chase Haven Compassion Center serves 500 families a year now. 3 buildings, 24 beds, a staff of 30. The sign by the door has 3 quotes. Every ending is a beginning. George Whitmore. Love rises. Nora Haven. We save each other. Victoria Torres. Victoria and Michael have 2 children, Hope, age 3, and Samuel, 18 months. They're growing up in the center, comfortable with death because they understand life, unafraid of endings because they've seen so many beginnings. Ethan married Margaret 2 years ago. She'd resisted at first. I'm too old for romance, she'd said. Romance is for people who have time to waste, he'd answered. We don't, so let's skip to the good part. They run the center together, her medical knowledge and his business sense creating something neither could manage alone. Blake's anonymous donations continue. His French wife, Marie, teaches art therapy to patients. Their twin daughters, age 4, speak 3 languages, English, French, and the universal language of holding someone's hand when they're scared. Father Frank, now 81, still holds services every Sunday, not just for the dying, but for the living who need reminders that grace exists in ordinary moments. Storm lived 2 more years after Nora died. The vet said it was impossible. His heart was too damaged, his remaining legs too weak. But Storm had never been good at following medical advice, just like his owner. He died in his sleep, full of stolen bacon, surrounded by people who loved his 3-legged stubbornness. On the anniversary of Nora's death, they gather on the beach, not to mourn, but to remember. Victoria reads Yeats, Michael plays guitar. He's gotten better, though not much. Hope asks why they're celebrating someone who's gone. Because, Victoria tells her daughter, she taught us that having nothing doesn't mean giving nothing. That broken people can build beautiful things. That love isn't just something you feel, it's something you do, every day, especially when it's hard. The church bells ring at 6:47, just as they have every morning since Nora died. Not for her death, but for the reminder. Every ending is a beginning. Every loss teaches love. And sometimes angels come disguised as homeless women who feed stray dogs with bread they need themselves. In George's old office, now Victoria's, hangs the last photo taken of them all. A wedding on a beach. A dying woman smiling in a wheelchair. A three-legged dog stealing cake. Strangers who became family. Proof that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most broken soil. The center's motto, painted above the entrance in Michael's careful handwriting, "We are all dying, we are all living, we are all learning to rise." I need to tell you something about that day at St. Mary's. I was there, in the 15th pew, watching it all unfold. When Father Frank dropped his prayer book and recognized Nora, when Victoria's world cracked open like an egg, when they all nearly drowned in that cold October surf, that was the moment everything changed. Not just for them, but for all of us watching. You see, Nora taught us something that day. Serving others while carrying your own grief doesn't make you weak, it makes you necessary. The center they built afterward became our town's heart. Every Tuesday I volunteer there now. Not because I'm particularly good or noble, but because watching broken people rebuild together showed me that isolation is the only true poverty. We all need witnesses to our struggles, hands to hold in the darkness, someone to remind us that rising is possible, even when sinking feels easier. This story was inspired by accounts of human resilience and community healing, created solely for entertainment purposes. The narrative does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence, self-harm, or harmful behavior. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health issues or thoughts of self-harm, please seek help from qualified professionals immediately.